Okay, we have our distinguished guests here with us and our friends and colleagues. So we're sharing one mic. And Kevin, hi, yes, Kevin is our facilitator for this session.
Apparently I'm the right-hand facilitator. Where would you like me?
Oh, anyway, you're actually the sole facilitator for this session to inform you. That's how, that's how emergent we are. And I think, can we have a mic for him because he has to maybe be captured? There is that mic working or, huh?
I'm going to lose all my friends now that you set this up.
Yes.
So building off of your work, now that you're setting apart from everybody else.
Well, I'll leave you to join the dots on that one. Okay, and yeah. We'll just pass the mic.
What was the first question?
There's no first question yet.
There's no first question?
Yeah,
Yes.
go for it then.
Okay.
You can ask more questions.
Does anybody have a burning question, or I'm going to ask? Oh, excellent. The one in the back, blue shirt, and I guess I'm going to walk around like old Phil.
Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. I'd like to start the ball rolling with a question related to ethics. Right?
Sorry, Manchong, can you just capture that for the video recording purposes? Very
Okay, I'd like to start the ball rolling by asking a question related to ethics. Question is, what, in your opinion, are the safeguards that we might need to consider in order to lower the threat of discrimination, typesetting, or undesirable influences? And a related question is, how much are teachers entitled to know about students? Are there things that teachers may be better off not knowing, so that we can bias them or something like that?
I'll dive in. Okay, so is this tertiary or secondary or primary?
K-12.
K-12, thank you. That makes it more complex, doesn't it? How much are teachers entitled to know? So I think it's how much the students and parents want to share. That's really the ultimate point, I think. Nabil's talk today about the digital students coming through, current students coming through are very free in the data that's given off. It's what we actually use that and how they use that makes more sense. So I think in terms of the ethics, I think you can't shy away from it and there's no easy answer. So you've got to go back and have a conversation and what's the context of your school, the organisation, your policies, your government policies and so on, and how does it actually start to work through with that? And then even the taxi driver today he spent 15 minutes on my 25-minute trip here telling me there's too many cameras in Singapore. And I thought, well, why is there too many cameras in Singapore? And he said, well, they're trying to catch me speeding. I said, well, don't speed. But so I think it's really then the privacy, the data, the things that come in. What is the aim of it? What are you trying to do with learning analytics and how do you actually make it a more open conversation where people can voice concerns and those tensions around privacy and ethics and what's going to make sense for your institution? There is no easy answer. George, who's not here, I'll just flag that again so we can have 6 or 7. And Abelardo Pardo wrote a very good paper in, I think it was BJET, around privacy and ethics and learning analytics. And one of the core points there was we hand things over, we hand data over when we feel that there's a return. So we give Facebook pretty much everything that we have about ourselves, but in return we get a moderately good social networking site which allows me now to try and avoid my family as much as possible. But we do the same with Twitter, we do the same with other events where we hand over data but we get something back in return. What is it that we're actually getting back from the students? What are we giving them, sorry? When they give us data, what are we giving back to them that actually says, okay, this is a viable exchange here, then we can see value in it. But again, there's limits to that. Right? So, and your point then, will it be used for discrimination, profiling, things like that? I certainly hope not. But I would also add, we're probably doing it now in our classrooms anyway. If any social network paper you want to open up, there's a homophilic relationships that we always look for. If I go to a party, you look for people like yourself. Right? The people who, even if it's the way you dress or your hairstyle. I've got a stunningly great hairstyle. I can pass on my hairdresser details later, but I might go and sort out people who look like that. So again, you have a conversation and you're immediately judging it. Is this someone going to be talking about highly conservative politics that I don't want to be broiled into or party, or do I move on? So we do it unconsciously or consciously anyway. It's how do we actually have the conversations and make it more transparent that will fit within our education context.
If I could just build a little bit on that, I think one thing that I've seen in the classroom research that I've been involved in is actually evidence that what Shane is saying is true. That so if you think about it in terms of classroom discussions, teachers know who their old faithful students are, the ones they can count on, that if they ask, call on them, that they'll have something good to say, and then they can move on because, time is of the essence. You don't have time for a slow student. But what that can mean is that there are some students who never get called on. And so we've seen in some of our classroom research that, as much as half of the class never speaks in months, and that very few students speak frequently in the class discussions. So we also, in follow-up research, found that some of the reason for this was because of beliefs that teachers had about themselves or the students, or that the students had of themselves that weren't necessarily true about abilities to interact in certain productive ways for their learning. It raises the question in my mind of whether, the assumption that giving teachers more information actually improves decision-making. So maybe we should think, in addition to the ethical issues, what, can we share without violating some concern? What is the information that actually does support good decision-making and maybe prevents bad decision-making or just unproductive decision-making? And I'd be happy for anybody to disagree with me.
I think this is a very, it's one of the key topics, because so if you look, ought to look at currently the data regulation in Singapore. For example, if you go the research route, it's well regulated. You need to do IRB. You need to acquire parent consent if they are less than 21. So we are, for research, have to be well trained to address ethical issues. At least at NTU, it's really well done. But the issue is when it goes over into classroom quality improvement. And I would say that it depends on the lifetime of the data. It depends on at what level you put on the data. Because I think data becomes problematic when it's become longitudinal, when you can see more long-term trends. When it's short-term improvement of a classroom activity or assessment, it has a very short span. So as we move on this ladder of analytics, we need to address that very thoroughly, because once you see long-term trends, that's I think where the risk is when it can have implication on your employability or implication on anything that the record is there. But for short-term, I'm quite confident that teachers are competent enough to use this data for the best of their students. But it's more and more about when it starts to be stored, when you can start to get trends, you can analyze it, when other people beside the teachers have access to it, and may not look at this data with the same sensitivity as a teacher, because teacher has a good connection to the students, but when someone else coming up from outside doesn't have the same ethical sensibility to the data. They see data, they can do a lot of things. And so the answer has been to anonymize, but once you anonymize the data, you lose a lot of the meanings. I mean, you understand, it's like the MOOCs. You go back to the MOOCs, we have a lot, they access data to the MOOCs, but it's not very useful unless you make a connection to demographics or things. But someone needs to run this one as soon as possible while we're still doing research, and have this kind of regulation that is not only, that is also progressively enabling this to be used to fully.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think partially George is not today because he would be forced to drop his pants again. And he had this metaphor of asking ethics and privacy questions at least a couple of years ago. It was like dropping pants in the middle of a party. Nobody wants to talk to you anymore. But I think we are now moving to the stage where people are offering different types of approaches. So the last Learning and Learning conference, one of the two best papers was a framework for policy, for privacy protection. It's called Delicate. And I think we are getting now into the next stage where people are now talking about very concrete approaches and even solutions to ethics and privacy. And I think we moved past these just basic questions, so I have ethical issues. But I think ethics is still far unaddressed question. And partially, I think major reason for that is that we need to think about ethics not in terms of just the present moment, but future uses that we don't know what there will be. And I think that's really what makes digital data so much different from those data that we've been collecting for decades or centuries, right? Because we've been always collecting data inside of education, at least in terms of student enrollments. We had that kind of legal obligation, but it becomes a question now that we are collecting digital data, and these digital data are unremovable, right? And there are some legislation that is happening, at least in Europe, and that's basically right to be forgotten. And right to be forgotten is primarily initiated to respond to different social media that are commoditizing the use of data. We do not think that those data will be commoditized in education in many cases, but the moment somebody has that opportunity to sell students' data to somebody else, or to some students' future, perhaps career progression be influenced by poor performance or some kind of whatever random accident happened during their elementary education in their, I don't know, 40s, that's not something you would expect to happen, right? And shouldn't happen, shouldn't be influencing something like that. So to me, that's really a very critical thing. The other critical thing is that there are some researchers who are going into even different types of data is coming, and it is related to genetics. And that's, to me, also another significant kind of concern, ethical one. Are we then promoting like eugenics 2.0? And I don't think we want to end up in that as well. So there are ethical issues that are talking about future uses of data that are quite unintentional and they are quite dangerous. I don't think that there are huge implications in terms of ethics that are happening in classrooms that hasn't been addressed already based on some of the research. But something that is happening in the future based on the data that is being collected for a different purpose, that's something which is really, really important.
But nonetheless, I would like to echo Carolyn's point with regard to really having a very deep discussion about what are the information that teachers should know, given all these visualizations and analytics available.
I think earlier on in your presentation, you talked about the importance of understanding the contributions of other fields. So in the field of psychology, for instance, the Rosenthal effect, the Pei-Ling effect, is something that is fairly well established. The understanding that I think the experiment was about how they told this this teacher that you are teaching a class of geniuses that has not developed yet, even though it's a very average class. And eventually, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts because it shaped the way the teachers behave and her attitude towards the students. So just reflecting on some of the projects that we have seen, I guess on one level, intuitively you may know that this child is socially awkward. But if I have data and representation to confirm that this child is socially awkward, I do not know how that might shape the way the teacher react to the child. But I'm also not going to the other extreme of saying that let's forget it, let's not have any insights at all. I suppose at the end of the day, the crux really is well, I suppose it's helping the teachers to be able to make sense of the data that's given, so that they're able to design quality intervention to it. I suppose it's about nuancing the kind of representations and reports that comes out through our learning analytics. Fairly cheesy, but I suppose the line about great power that learning analytics brings also ushers in that great responsibility that we have when we convey, especially as researchers, when we convey the results. It has to be built on certain strong, robust basis or constructs because at the end of the day, the diagrams and visualization can be seductively deceptive to a layman, and I will be taken in. And where we are sitting, we have had many industry vendors peddling their wares, saying that I have this very nice spider diagrams, nice network analysis showing that this and that, and I suppose I do not know whether in the field of learning analytics that has already been looked at, discussed, and whether there are policy positions that have been developed according to that. Yeah, just a comment.
Well, the mic is with me, so I'm going to keep it. No, great question, good points, but actually many questions there. But I mean, let's first say that learning analytics is only as a field established for 5 years, right? So, and there are so many things to be addressed. Like our sister's field, learning science, has been around for 20 plus years, and they still, I'm sure, have so many unanswered questions, right? And learning analytics doesn't. One of them is definitely what to show and how to present data. I think we are now definitely starting to realize, well, let's not use like low-hanging fruit and ask our random graphical designers to show beautiful charts, but rather think about intentions, why we are using data. And many people are actually going away even just thinking about we need to visualizations, but rather to need to verbalize messages that are coming as the interpretation of data for some individuals. That's one critical thing that we are realizing. The other group is realizing, well, we need to, first of all, start from educational theory and then also build on the research in human-computer interaction and see basically how people are interpreting data. And that's really critical voice as well. And that hasn't been done much. We are just recently getting papers that are presented at the LAC conference as well. They're doing proper studies in classrooms and reporting back some of these findings. And these findings are clearly indicating some of these like lessons learned with respect to class average, how useless it is, and a few other things, and also pointing the field in the direction where we want to go and what to do next. And plenty of that research also has lessons and builds on educational psychology, different types of motivational grounds or different types of approaches to learning, et cetera, et cetera. The other critical point that I wanted to make as well with respect to research is even the literature, for example, we would like to achieve the ideal of deep learning and promote deep learning in our classrooms. But even the literature on deep learning, and Biggs himself even wrote once that basically deep learning is also a combination of different study approaches that we are taking. And in some aspects, we can't always just stick to a deep strategy all the time, but rather sometimes we are also using some surface strategies as well. And we must avoid labeling students as he's a deep learner and this one is a surface learner. Because we are actually changing our strategies from time to time. And we need to understand conditions when these strategies are being changed and why we are changing these strategies. And also that's the way how we can intervene. And that's basically is making strategy research so much more productive discourse from learning styles discourse. And I think many people are trying to connect learning analytics research to learning science discourse, but I think that's highly unproductive. We need to think about study strategies and study approaches and the ways how they are changed and how we can intervene and when to intervene. Those are actually important questions.
I just have to make a comment. I just discovered today that we are from different communities, so we publish in different venues. So in healthcare, we would publish in Medline, in Bifactor. So we have never published in LAC, even though we know it's outstanding. So I think it makes me think that an effort on summarizing literature from different perspectives is quite needed. Because we are talking to different communities, and we've been doing research on, for example, one thing I would like to say, there's a difference for me between insight and actionable insight. Actionable insight is when you really know that there is some action. Insight, you can get insight for so many different ways, but if you get insight that is not actionable, that's why you have this dilemma. So it has to be actionable insight. And second, I agree fully that the thing happening now is that different perspectives are coming into some kind of transdisciplinary approach. And what I was trying to convey is that we have a few strong communities. If we leverage those and identify the ones that are not speaking, I think we might start to get really good answers.
Well, I guess I tend to be a very skeptical person in general. Everybody who knows me knows that about me and tries to put up with it, yeah. I think skepticism is very useful. So I was happy to hear that the comments about, some skeptical attitudes about some kinds of products that people have pushed. But I think there are real questions about how to push the field forward and how to bring change. And I think even I, sitting and listening to the talks today, realize that in my own research, I'm very, very focused on one very small part of the whole pipeline. And there are big problems about infrastructure and ways that people think about data and how decisions are made. And I've had a discussion with George many times, who's not here, at this meeting though, and since I'm so skeptical, I have very frequently said to him, it really makes me nervous the way learning analytics gets pushed as though, you know, with just a little bit of knowledge about how to build a model, people can go off and do something meaningful, and it's giving them just enough rope to hang themselves with. And don't you think it would be better to wait until we really have it worked out before we push? And George always said to me, and I could hear this in my head listening to the talks today, the problem is this: people are going to push, and if it's not us, it will be somebody else. So what do we do? You know, so Dragan is mentioning, yeah, it's a young field, we admit that, you know, and I'm the first to admit that the work that I do is a work in progress, and there are many holes and many things that need to be shored up. But what is the process for getting us to point A to point B then? You know, it seems like, you know, in a way, it's this very messy, you know, not linear process. It's sort of happening at all points at once in partial ways, and it's not clear where it will all settle in the end. But you know, acknowledging the skepticism, it seems to me I've started to come to the conclusion that, you know, sitting on my hands and waiting until we have it worked out is the wrong answer. You know, I think George finally convinced me. But I think that there are still questions, though, about how can we move forward safely, though, you know, without causing a mess along the way, or overclaiming to an extent that then people become discouraged with it and stop funding and stop allowing the forward progress. I saw this in the 80s with artificial intelligence, and that's one reason why I'm, you know, concerned. So anyway, that's just saying it's a big question.
Just share something. Oh, you go. You go. Yeah, I just wanted to just reiterate that I was asked a question when we presented our proposal for funding to the ministry and to the EduLab funding program, and the issue was why now? Why don't we wait and then leapfrog when the, you know, analytics has progressed, because it's so nascent, it's emergent, we don't know. And I think in Singapore we've seen it. It's not just in Singapore, I'm sure, but in Singapore we see that the business analytics, the vendors, it's going to happen. The products are going to push, and these are the right product or the perfect product or the best product, most closest to giving us the most accurate and meaningful, actionable insight, will only come if there's a pedagogic voice, and if pedagogues are involved in this design and development process and in the methodology. So and then together we can have a cautious progress, I think, together. And because only the pedagogues, and we have very limited knowledge, even now, of the teaching and learning process, or how to optimize it, or how to understand it. We always qualify, but at least we know to some extent, and we base our science or our decisions, you know, on being, I think that critical thinking or that evaluation or that skepticism. And I often find that there's always this one question that how do we know what's a good product or not a good product, or how do we know what's a bandwagon to go, you know, to partner with, or who to partner with, or and I always find one characteristic in the people that I work with that are really strong scientists is when they, versus someone with an agenda or a commoditizing kind of, you know, perspective, is that level of skepticism, that level of cautiousness, that level of saying, let's be involved in that process. It's going to be iterative. every time I find that if someone says, oh, this is it, and this is the answer, and we're not moving from that, we just want data and we want to try it, and we're ready to implement it, and we have the best predictive model, it always makes me nervous, yeah. And often I use that as a sort of criteria about who to, work with and work on.
Sure, I've got a product.
Yes. I'm replicating all his products, not him.
Actually, when you were referring to social awkward, you were looking at me.
We all know socially awkward.
Sorry, there's a question at the back.
Thank you, and I just want to say thanks for putting this together. I think you all have been fantastic, and really, it's been very, very interesting. I'm from early childhood and special education. That's my home here at NIE, and I guess my concern in some ways is not about analytics itself, it's about the decision making that happens after analytics have been reported. And so, for example, we know how important play is in children. And one of the things in Singapore that we love our data, right? Like, we love it. And so now in children, they love play, so now we've introduced purposeful play, which goes against everything that play actually is, right? Once you try to make it purposeful, it's not play anymore. And so it's like saying, oh, well, we know critical thinking is important, so we're going to set a time for that. Well, that's not how critical thinking works, right? And so, like, I was just noticing someone at the top there says, learning analytics seems to relegate the important notion of impermanence in humans as unpredictable. And so at what point, and have you seen any concrete examples now as these case studies start coming out where leadership says, okay, you know what, we've learned this, but we're going to balance that with common sense and say that, not everything can go into analytics. It's also, there's just commonsensical things that kind of balance the science of learning with also the art of learning and the art of unpredictability from humans. I was just wondering if you had any concrete, or maybe George would have some if he was here, but if you guys could just maybe, point out anything specific that you've seen leadership do to kind of balance this, because I think that could potentially be a big issue as we move forward. Thank you.
No.
He's in leadership and he doesn't exercise common sense.
That's it. Common sense, it does imply that everyone has it, but I think it's not common at all. I think the important thing is to remember about analytics. Do you remember the diagram that Dragan showed at the last part? It was a colourful one. It was a systems thinking diagram. Yeah. It's got nothing to do with the conversation. I just actually really remember it. It's a really good paper. Please go. Just doing a bit of psychology testing here. No, so one of the important elements there was that the strategic capability drives those other components there and how you actually form the strategy around it. And it has elements there that you've got to start to address and have open conversations around things, the tension of ethics or the tensions around accountability. So you remember back maybe 5-10 years ago, and maybe it still happens in Singapore, but definitely in Australia, people did not want their lectures captured because then it was an accountability issue. What if I now say the wrong thing? When I talk here now, I'm being recorded, so I'll say the right thing. But if I wasn't being recorded, I might make a mistake sometime. Regularly, if you're talking to my wife, but that's irrelevant. So if you make a mistake, it's gone, the moment's passed, okay? So, but if it's now captured on film, can that be held? That's the longevity of data. Is it going to be brought back to me to say I said something silly, that was on the test, I gave them the wrong information, therefore, and it goes on and on and on. So there are ramifications associated with it. So I think it's complex, right? So there's all these competing elements that come together with lots of different dimensions coming together. It's a complex system, which means, as Dragan mentioned in his, you change one part of the system, it doesn't have a linear effect on the rest of the system. It has unanticipated effects on the system. And so that's why whatever you do in analytics in terms of the leadership aspect or the organisation, government or whatever, is to think that, okay, we need to be adaptive here. So we think this is going to be the intended outcomes of this approach. So we think if we have an element that even says socially awkward kids versus non-socially awkward kids, and we're going to have an intervention to help those kids have serious play, no, purposeful play. Yeah. It's an oxymoron, isn't it? Yeah. Fun run, yeah. Serious gaming, really deeply embedded. So, if you're having that approach, then what's the outcome of that going to be and what are the ramifications? And be ready to adapt. And so the only way you can adapt is by listening to the voices and the key stakeholders and implementing that. But that doesn't mean and the key thing in the leadership, or at least what we've adopted at our university, having a voice and noting it to leadership doesn't mean you're not heard, or doesn't mean they automatically have to take it on, because there are many, many other decisions and implications and other competing demands that are associated with it. So we can't turn off a sprinkler on one end of town and not have not turn it off in other areas. Then you can't say your house is going to be on water preservation, but everyone else is now free, just because that's the process for it. So having the voice, though, to be heard, and then articulating your rationale around it, at least gets people, they can understand your decision-making process. So I'd say the key element in there around whether it's purposeful play, that's hard to say, or whether it's some other aspects around analytics implementation, is to make the voices heard, but also have a rationale and an opportunity to engage back.
I'm just going to add, in terms of analytics and use, and there's obviously growing interest in analytics, many institutions, and obviously it's a growing business as well. But what we are also experiencing that some well-established now learning analytics organizations are reaching out to researchers for help, because they are talking to institutional leaders and they are realizing they don't have sufficient capabilities to deal with analytics. They don't understand it. And there's actually demand for also development of leaders how to use data. And it's, as any basically role in our society, leaders also need to develop in some way or other way. And that's why we also need to engage them in that process and create these types of opportunities. And that's really something critical, and we are seeing also in the Society for Learning Analytics Research as part of our responsibility to provide these type of opportunities. The other thing is I would like to reflect really also in terms of the complexity of the decisions, what we are making and what type of decisions are made. We are typically talking a lot about predictive modeling, but also there hasn't been much work on system dynamics in learning analytics, and basically that is something that is trying to model the entire system. However, we need to understand, whenever we say a word model, it's not reality. It's a model, and model has the attributes to reduce reality. That's the first and foremost feature, and tries to also help us to make certain references, but we also need to understand that those are limitations as well, built upon the data and also assumptions that these models were created on. And then we also know that, of course, when we are creating a certain policy, if we have certain simulations, that policy will be better informed. And while certain policy might be solving or addressing a particular pressing problem, we never know what will be also some unintentional consequences. For example, great thing is a policy which was implemented in the US to motivate people to live out of big cities like New York. For example, New York was like in the 18th or 19th century, a place where they had many different contagious diseases, right? And the easiest way to solve it, to stimulate people to live in suburbia, and then promote in that way also big American dream. That today resulted in basically another epidemic, which is obesity. People are hardly walking, right? So what was a good solution at some point in time, basically it's not a good solution in the future, and we don't know what future may bring. And in the same way also is with analytics.
Like to, try to comment. Like when I first studied IT in education, they used to have this analogy about IT being the silver bullet, right, to solve all the problems. So I think in the field of learning analytics, because it's new, people think like learning analytics can solve all the problems of whatever education problems or whatever. But I think as people realize, and as I enter deeper into the field, learning analytics is definitely not a silver bullet, and there's a lot of contextual nuances to any sort of analytics, as you have seen today in all the presentations. But I think one key message I think is important is in terms of the balance, in terms of how much change that you would like to push, as well as the protection, the measures that can help in terms of protecting the learner, the child, or whichever data it is. So I think that's the balance that we're all trying to achieve. Like, how much can we push in terms of to have new insights and new ways of seeing things, but at the same time protect the various stakeholders. And I think from there are some guidelines that are already implemented in place. So I think as whichever standpoint you come from, be it leaders or teachers, or I think it's important also to know the key principles that you have in mind in terms of protecting the learner. I think that's some of the key principles of that, and to know that learning analytics is not the silver bullet, and there are a lot of things that is possible, but you also have to be, in a sense, critical, as what some people here have mentioned, about where it can lead, and also be part of that community and helping to move it to the next stage. Yeah.
Short one, maybe a different way of looking at it. So, when you have these trends that keeps coming back, very often if there is a big excitement, often the resources are tied to those. So that's why they get this kind of a momentum. Usually a good way is to quickly go beyond the excitement phase, so people are sensible in terms of, so they can try to address the unmet needs as opposed to trying to break the whole regime as such. Too much resistance will make this go undercover and becoming a niche innovation. Once this pop up again, it will be much stronger. So strategically, I would say, like in medicine, for example, no one thinks that learning analytics will solve everything. We have humanistic medicine. We have a broad range of, we are humans, right? So we try to find areas where this is clearly of value, right? So this is what the job has to be done, because I think this is coming in. So while we're doing this, there is the industry, everyone is pushing this and making it even like core of their business. It's almost mature, and they're coming back. It's such strong that would make it quite appealing at the institution level, because they would have the solutions, the packaging, the flyers, the salesmen, the ideas. And you're standing there and you do not have another answer. You're not providing any solution. So if you come from a leadership, let's say, if you're looking for a solution, it's not being provided by a current, of course people will jump on it, some of them. And once it rolls over, the resources are there, and then they just go in. But I'm quite confident that everything stays in the system, it gets beaten for a while because it doesn't have resources. And so it's tactically, you have to think tactically, what effects, but this is coming in. Whatever.
Oh, no, actually, I'd rather hear another question.
I'm Alan Song from MUS. Thanks very much for organizing this session. It's really informative. This question in relation to what Jennifer just put up just now, in relation to platforms for this kind of learning analytics. And I believe that Shane and Dragan is involved in a project called Completing the Loop. That's been done for a couple of years, where you have meaningfully created systems whereby teachers are able to use it meaningfully. So my question is, would you be able to share some insights as to what key learning points for educators like us who are keen to embark on this kind of project, and possibly collaboration among institutions or schools, because there's a collaborative project among 3 universities.
Shane,
come on, I always go first. Half an hour to think about these very articulate answers. About water restrictions here. I got nothing.
I was fixing public health policy. No, I mean, thanks very much for the question. That project has been getting to its end. Obviously the project was, to me, quite useful in the sense that for the first time we actually tried not to build just a tool, but rather to build a framework which can help us instantiate different types of tools and to look into the lenses that instructors and teachers are interested in higher education. That's one important thing. The other thing that we also discovered as part of the project as well is that once we started applying this tool, not necessarily that we discovered some huge results in terms of learning improvements or style strategies, but rather actually that we got insights that there's lots of embarrassing things inside of the LMSs and course designs, right? And to us, basically, the consequence of that was that many teachers actually, once they saw that, oh, I shouldn't have that there, and they start actually being much more pedantic about their instructional designs. And to me, that's a really good news as part of the project. Obviously, we would like to have in that process more insights into the qualitative aspects of learning rather than just some of the quantitative that been implemented presently in the tool. And that's part of the other OLT grant Shane and I are involved into, and that's basically led by Kirsty Kito out of Queensland University of Technology. It's called Beyond the LMS, and that's something that we would like to see the connections between the two, especially with the type of work Carolyn is doing in terms of linguistic analysis of different types of discussions, but also at the same time any other types of dispositional or qualitative aspects. In terms of institutional collaboration, that's a good question. One thing that becomes really, I think, very important is to find good models how institutions can work jointly on collaborative projects where we are developing also technologies that can be used across different institutions, especially through open source models. I think many institutions are having their internal resources that are being invested into external consultants, but there are pieces of technology now that are emerging there. And I think many institutions can already commit certain resources to work on these different types of projects. The question becomes coordination and also critical mass of institutions and willingness to really just focus and say, well, this is the project, let's go from this, and let's focus our resources. Apereo Foundation is also trying to work on their open learning analytics, but I think although I think it's a very valuable initiative, and there are certain institutions that are involved, I think to a certain extent, hasn't still been picked up by the majority of institutions. And I think there is also kind of a potentially productive space where all these different initiatives can certain level converge, but of course you would like to also preserve certain level of divergence as well, so that you can have some level of creative differences.
So if I can just jump in briefly before I hand off to Shane, so he has just a few more minutes to polish his presentation. In the spirit of Pierre Dillenburg, who very frequently, in the space of learning analytics and in other spaces, comes up with incredibly low-tech but very creative solutions that work very well and that can be used very broadly, I realized that actually I did have something to say in response to this question, and that is that what we have seen that teachers have been profoundly impacted by is just even seeing transcripts of their own discussions with students. Short of any of the kinds of modeling that analytics of various sorts can allow us to do, the act of reflection, sometimes in the non-reduced form, for teachers anyway, at the level of decision making that they're making, can be very effective, because often I think the teachers are not so aware of how they're interacting with students. So we could provide them with an overview that would give them kind of a summary of their style. But what we've seen, and I'm not writing that off, I think that that's something that many of us are working on in different ways, but we shouldn't write off the low-tech solution either, that actually it's the reflection really that we want. And what is the data that will stimulate that reflection? That should be our question.
This is much easier when you get more time to think. It really is. Because now I think about all the questions that I could have. So I think in the spirit of wrapping up, I think that, I'll be very brief. I think the first thing is when you go through a process like completing the loop, it was a tool then designed to how do we extract information from learning management systems and give it back to instructors to better inform their teaching approaches. The first part was to be really consultative and go on, let's go and talk to teachers and see what they want. I think that was the first mistake. Right? It's important to just to go against everything that I said before about being open and discursive, but I think it's important to engage with them and hear their thoughts and that, but often you don't know what you want. That's the critical part, and I think Pierre Dillenburg in particular is exceedingly successful because he deals with problems that he can actually target and identify. So they spend a lot of time saying, here's the problem. They don't go in and say, what's the solution you would like? And so they talk about the problem and identify what the problem is, and then they work through a solution. The way that we've often approached learning analytics is say, well, you tell us what you want, or web development or anything else. You tell us what you want. Yeah. Well, I want a website. Yeah, but what color? What would you like in it? And you don't know that actually, in the end, I didn't want a website. I wanted a collaborative teaching space. I wanted something else. So it's not until you actually take people through that journey that you see, okay, we could have done this a little bit differently at the end. I think in a project like that, it was fantastic in the number of people that were involved. I think it was fantastic that the level of engagement among teachers in that process, and importantly, that it'll be an open source tool. But I think we could have taken it a lot further by saying, okay, we know what you want here is you want to see whether or not students are engaging in your learning in your course. That's a given. Now where can we take you in terms of other analytic approaches that we could be? And it may have been things like, well, give us a reflection here on your teaching. What is your course design? What are your intentions here that we could pull through that information a lot more and take those teachers on the same journey, but could have sped it up a little bit quicker. Yep. I think that's the biggest thing I learned from it.
I would just add the work that Daniel is doing at the University of Sydney. You know better that work.
Yes.
It's quite low tech.
Oh, yeah. So Denny Liu is a brilliant young guy actually from Macquarie, now back to Sydney University, but had things very simply as through a blended learning format as just being able to go in and have a barcode or a QR code that would just scan on students and then bring up and say, okay, what did they get on a test quiz last night in part of their blended learning approach? How often did they engage with other students? And it was a very, very easy way in which you could actually have a more personal conversation with the class. So I could walk in and say, well, Jen, you did really well last night. You got 8 out of 10. I can see that you're lifting your engagement. Well done. Keep up the good work. Very impressed. So it becomes a lot more personal. Even the tone of my voice was much more different.
He doesn't use that tone very often.
No, I don't. That's my teacher voice. But it just made, it was a way in which you could relate to the student a lot quicker, and it was just an easy tool that came through, and it wasn't overly high tech. He developed it himself. Now, I think Dragan mentioned today about the issue around IT support and making sure everyone's on board. Not everyone's on board. And so what can you do? And there's different models. You often get the gentleman who spoke about what can we learn from leadership or what can we advise leadership on. That's a top-down approach. But there's also the bottom-up approach. There's lots and lots of great work that is happening in very low tech in classrooms every day. How do you scale that out and share? That's really the critical aspect of those analytics.
That's a good question. Of how do you take the 1,000 Carolyns that are in the world and integrate them with the 1,000 Dragans in the world, and so that you don't miss the noise that the Carolyn is disrupting at the grassroots level with the organizational institutional level that Dragan's working at. How do you build up from that grassroots so that you foster them without losing them?
Yeah, to Singapore and your different organisations, just a quick show of hands, if you have learning and teaching grants, innovation grants, development grants, anything like that that you can apply for within your organisation. I don't see any hands, but I see nods. I see one hand. You're really good at following instructions. I like that, the way you interpret them and still give a good response. Thank you. The one thing in numerous organisations I've worked, again, I haven't worked in Singapore, but the ones in Australia that I've worked at and even in Canada, we often say, well, here's $10,000, $20,000 or $30,000. Go and knock yourself out. Okay, you've got a great idea. You've got a way in which we think you can address an important problem, and we go and give you that funding. And that funding will last generally around a year, 2 if you're lucky, okay? At the end of that 2 years, what happens? Absolutely nothing, right? So then you're often building up an embedded approach because now everyone's reliant on the grassroots Carolyn now running this server underneath her desk who gets no compensation for it. A head of school just expects that she's going to do it. IT won't take it on because they don't know how the hell she actually planned or have written the code for it anyway. And where did you get that data from? That's quite impressive, right? So there's all these other issues there through that, what was a great idea, a seed idea, but it hasn't grown. So in that, I'll go back to that systems model because that's how we implement things. That's very much how we're implementing things. What's the strategic capability we're trying to develop? How do we actually build that implementation capacity and get people more and more interested in that process? So Uni SA, we fund the same thing. You've got come and tell me what your great idea is and how you think you're going to solve it. I'll then assess whether or not it's innovative, it hasn't been done before, and whether or not we can adopt it in our institution. That's the first point. I don't want 20 pages of past literature. Tell me the problem and what your proposed solution is. That's it. I'll give you up to $20,000 plus additional in-kind support now to go and work on that for a year. If it's got legs, I think, okay, this is going to solve, it's not just your course or program, this could go across disciplines. I will fund you automatically next year. Now, the goal of that funding then is not to say, okay, you're doing great work, add more features and widgets to your tool. Let's say it's a tool. It's just grow it, disseminate it, get it embedded, go and work with IT, our IT group, get them to assess the quality, if it's a tool, assess the quality of the code. How does it fit in with our ecosystem? How does it actually function with our current tools that we've got there? Where does it go? What are you going to do about it? The third year of funding now is really a discussion with our head of school and saying, we want to take you out of your school and into my unit, so all you are doing is professional development. You're doing research on what you've implemented for the past 2 years, and you're doing professional development and upskilling all the other people now who are adopting it. And I think that's the only way you can get our leadership and our grassroots to come together. Now, our leadership group has been exceptional of understanding that the only way we're going to get innovative, high-quality practitioners is to let them grow, let them make mistakes, but also support them in that process. So rather than weight everything on course evaluations, I think I touched on this today, build in other capacities. Show us other data that can demonstrate your quality around teaching. You know, if your retention's going down, your retention's going down, you know, why is it? What are you doing about it? And it could be, yep, we've dropped the standards. We know students who come in with a lower ATAR, Australian Tertiary Entrance Score, you know, they're coming in at 50, where last year you had them at 90. You know, so what can we start to help you with to give you more support in that area rather than say, well, you're not doing your job properly. So we understand there's lots of dimensions in this space, and that's where we're working at, trying to bridge those two elements together. I hope that addresses it.
With that, in light of time, I'm just going to invite our speakers to maybe make a closing comment about their sort of reflections for the day, or one takeaway that they're leaving this, you know, Singapore crowd with. But Elizabeth will still be here in the NIE, you know. But yeah, a leaving for today, just a closing comment. Or no.
Still need some time.
Key takeaway.
Could I pass it on to somebody first? Are you ready?
I need now my time.
Jen, you just shoot. Yeah, to me. Jen tends to throw me bombs. No, not really. No. She's been. I just want to thank. I mean, this is actually a lot of it is Jen's brainchild. So thank you, Jen, for trying to organize this. And yeah, it's running. It's on now. I think one key takeaway for me. I'm really glad for the response, because learning analytics. We've been talking about it, and this is like the first kind of symposium we're organizing in Singapore. So we're glad for the positive response. And I think one key takeaway from whatever has been shared, it's really the infancy of the field. And it's glad that finally Singapore is in the conversation, because previously we were not in the conversation. So I'm glad that for me, I mean, just based on participation and everything, for me the reflection is that at least now we're entering the conversation space, so we can add our voice to this conversation. And things are still evolving. So it's always it's good to get in the space, but at the same time be careful at the same time, and also be strategic in how we're going to move forward, because I think we're still figuring out what's the best way. So it's digesting all this and deciding which is like the possible ways forward. Yeah, so I guess it's why it's pathways ahead. We'll see how,
Thanks. Two big lessons for me. First one is that Shane actually came a long way, that he can crack his jokes and his Australian people can understand him. The second one is that I can still give a talk after 20 hours of traveling straight. So those are two major takeaways. But in terms of, I was actually quite impressed with the conversations that we had today and the quality of the questions we got from the audience. I really didn't know what to expect. I knew all the results that you folks have, your kids have in PISA, and obviously you are involved in educating these individuals, but I've been quite impressed with the quality of questions and the depth of the conversation, and in a way, thinking about next future steps. So that basically is to me that tells me that you are really well positioned in terms of analytics, and also thinking very deeply about the problems and understanding how to do and what to do next. And what I'm really hoping is that we are at this stage in terms of the development of the field of learning analytics, that we are really looking for leaders in the field who are from Asia. We need field to be developed here because it's a really big area and needs really great examples. And I'm hoping that we can do that. And what I'm learning here in Singapore is that we really have a really natural leader for this kind of place and the future growth. So that's what I'm really hoping, and I'm looking forward to the next opportunities to have conversations with you.
Yeah, so minus the point about traveling for 20 hours right before speaking here, I echo everything that the Dragan just said, because I feel like I learned so much from watching the interaction between the speakers and the audience, even though...
Shane.
And I'm growing in my appreciation for Shane's sense of humor. And because most of the members of this panel are people who I've heard speak one or many times in the past, but somehow being in this place and hearing the interaction with all of you has given me a different perspective on all of this work and how it fits together. So I feel like I actually learned a lot today, and I really appreciate having had the opportunity to participate with all of you. I echo especially Dragan's desire to see more of a community of learning analytics research in Asia, and I would say learning sciences in general. And in the International Society of the Learning Sciences, we've worked to make that really an international society, but we haven't always had the representation from all corners of the world that we'd like to have. And it's an exciting opportunity that this coming week we'll have the ICLS conference here, and I really encourage as many of you as possible to attend and interact with our community and get involved, because we would welcome interactions like this into our community.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed a lot today, and I think I enjoyed the fact that there were so many different perspectives, and that I was observing the participants here. A lot of you are thinking a lot, and I think it's a very good sign. And I think probably I'm the one that learned most by just hearing and interacting. So my wish is to for the organizer to find a quite imminent way to sustain this community and to sustain the dialogue, because I think once you go home you have a lot of questions, if you have a common interest, we need to sustain that somehow. Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's hard going now. Jen?
No, you go.
I'm still thinking. No, I think today I wasn't sure what to expect. With Jen, you never know.
I don't overscript, okay? So it can be immersed.
And it's been very fruitful, I think, certainly on my account. So it's been a pleasure to come here and start to make connections. So Australia is really not that far away, especially compared to flying to Europe, for instance. It'd be great to actually make a stronger set of connections between what we're doing in Australia and what's happening over in Singapore. And I think there's a huge untapped set of potential in here as you embrace this more. I think importantly, the question I would ask is not so much what I got out of today, or the key point today is what collectively and individually will you start to do with today. So less about Shane's jokes, although they were probably pretty good, really. It's probably having an on day rather than my off days, but nevertheless, what will you do? So I'd put it back to you and say, make the connections. You've got lots of people in this room representing many different organisations. Make the connections with those people and start the conversations around small-scale research or opportunities to share and share those skill sets. Dragan noted that analytics is a bricolage field. There are no experts in learning analytics, right? So everyone brings their own little perspective and view into that world. So the really good high-level functioning teams, that's what they are. They're teams who are made up of psychologists, data scientists, educationalists, and the list goes on and on and on. So make the connections and best wishes. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Thank you, and I just wanted to, thank everyone for coming and spending the day. I know we had even discussions around whether we structure it as 2 half days or 1 full day, because this issue of time, it's really not a luxury, and then we push it back and say it's not important, it's very important. Where do you find the time to sustain this conversation? Where do you find, and I'm very open source, I always say. I organize this, I'm looking forward to someone organizing the next conversation, and to keep it rolling. And if someone has some really great solution that is very efficient, then we don't have to reinvent the wheel, that you have been successful before in sustaining these communities, please, and we'd be very happy to join that. So I hope today is not only a cognitive, for me, it wasn't just a cognitive extension, even though that it was really it was really great for that. I was just really digesting, and I'm still digesting a lot. But one really important thing I think is that social extension as well, because we can't do this alone. We can't do this in 5s or 10s. We really, need to come together a bit more and make time for that and engage in these conversations together and have more space for more voices, I think, in a gathering like this. So think with me how we can grow the Singapore learning analytics, the Singapore education community, who is very keen to, tap on, influence, appropriate the possibilities of learning analytics, while at the same time always being cautious and and aware of the paradoxes, so that we together can forge new and exciting pathways forward. All right. Thank you very much for being here, and to all of you for coming from so far away. Thank you.